Good morning, bonjour. I am supremely honored by having been invited to speak and indeed to open this 2 days of amazing discussions. The program looks remarkable and wonderful, and I am very, very sad not to be able to participate in all through the days. And I appreciate the patience of my fellow participants and speakers that I will be delivering this by a recording. I want to thank the scientific committee and especially Ellen Geysens for this. And I do think that I am really shouldn't be, as it were, opening this in the presence of so many important researchers. I want to do two things today as a setting up. One is to explore the statement about the nature of this conference, this symposium, in terms of looking at the creative dynamic of women artists in places of production and exhibition in the 1960s and 70s, with regard to their consequences with the social issues of memory process. In the terms of that, I want to pose some questions, very profound questions about us working on this subject of women artists in these rather strange conditions in which they have become celebrities and blue chip investments selectively. Whom and what are we serving as art historians today? What are we servicing by our scholarship? What is the function of the trauma narrative or the personal melodrama in the manner in which the current selective re-inclusion of some women is happening in a heated market-inflected art history? For what are they being praised or sold? How are they being framed, and how are we contributing to it? The second question, apart from that kind of social memory, which is a feminist historiography on the one hand, is what is the meaning of the poster image? What does it tell us? What does it solicit? What does the juxtaposition imply? So in terms of feminist historiography, I think it's quite crucial that I immediately indicate that really I don't feel I should be here because so many great forerunners come before me and the foundations have been laid by others whom I wish to acknowledge. First of course, Ander Rothenberg, whose extraordinary exhibition in 1998 at the Szapocznikow gallery in Warsaw absolutely changed the game and reintroduced Alina Szapocznikow to not only obviously to the Polish art world, but to the world specifically, which inflected by an understanding of what had happened after Alina Szapocznikow died. And as she says in her catalogue, the 1973 retrospective wasn't able to situate her, but since then we have begun to understand this, and she references Louise Bourgeois as well as Eva Hesse as other artists through whom we've learned to reposition Alina Szapocznikow. My teacher in all of this is Agata Jakubowska, who is a Polish art historian of great distinction, who has written the first full biography or kind of monograph on the multiple works of Alina Szapocznikow, as well as translating into English, which we are intensely grateful for, the letters of Alina Szapocznikow and Richard Stanisławski, as well as editing the important collection of essays around her 2009 exhibition, in which she placed Alina Szapocznikow again with Louise Bourgeois, but with Pauline Boty, Maria Batutsova, Eva Hesse, and Paulina Orłowska. Thirdly, I wish to acknowledge the role of Tomek Kotlinski and Paweł Leszkowicz being also an expert on another artist we put in this conversation, Helen Chadwick, who died also very young in 1996, but of a different generation. But it was on the occasion of an exhibition he and Adam Budak organized or curated at the Szapocznikow in 2002, just 5 years after Ander Rothenberg's exhibition, called Louise Bourgeois, The Geometry of Desire, in which they situated Louise Bourgeois in the conversation at the beginning of the century with Proust, Freud, and Kafka, and they placed Louise Bourgeois in the same trajectory in between. I would introduce François Sagan, Louise, and Simone de Beauvoir in between as accountant. Whereas I would think that Alina Szapocznikow, whose catalogue by Rutenberg was placed in my hands at that point with the urgency that Western European art historians had not paid sufficient attention to the artists of the Eastern Europe, and now was the time for us to include their work in our remapping of the 20th century. I would place Alina Szapocznikow not so much in that same trajectory as in a trajectory with Charlotte Delbo at one end and Chantal Akerman at the other. I was able to be part of the first British exhibition at the Hepworth Gallery in Wakefield in Yorkshire, which also went to Baden-Baden and participated in this catalogue. In the catalogue, I wrote about the 1970 moment when Alina Szapocznikow was in New York. I called it a missed encounter. Now Hélène Guersan's much fuller, more documentary study of the exchanges, the meetings and exchanges between Alina Szapocznikow and Louise Bourgeois indicate more about why in which it didn't take off, in a sense, as a new opening into an American scene. Partly also, I think it is this very strange proposition of the Rolls-Royce in pink marble, which was a kind of conceptual gesture, which, however, is a very kind of Louise Bourgeois kind of piece, because in one sense it has this tricky little, cheeky little phallus that is placed on the foreground as a cast of a little penis in place of the spirit of ecstasy, which is the female figure that was typically on the Rolls-Royce insignia. But the status of Alina Szapocznikow, particularly less so at Louise Bourgeois, at the present time as a blue chip artist, not quite on the scale of the £1 million that are paid for Louise Bourgeois, of course, we are dealing with, in a sense, a market-led valuation, which is backing and the investment and the dissemination, and indeed giving the money for the big exhibitions, I suspect. And it's based on the back of a whole body of dedicated feminist curators and writers, starting with Anna Rothenberg, but even earlier Isabel Czarnowska and Leah Virginie, with Agata Jakubowska, Ruth Nowak, Sylvia Ebelmeyer, Gisela Kapitein, Anke Semkes, Adam Zimczyk, and of course Hervé Löwenbuch. These people we should thank, and I depend upon, in fact, and acknowledge all their work. Now, which Louise Bourgeois am I talking about, and when was Louise Bourgeois? Because my Louise Bourgeois, the one that impacted upon me and engaged me, comes from 1975 to 85, and my memories are of meeting her work in black and white on the pages or color, sometimes of Art Forum in the Lucy Lepard, when I was first trying to assemble materials for teaching about women artists at the beginning of a kind of feminist trajectory. And here you can see the specific works that are shown, including Kummel, Labyrinthine Tower, Torso, Fillette, and Pierre, the Femme Couteau and the Femme Pieux. So a very particular one of the 1960s, beginning to work in a variety of new materials, including marble. This was reprinted, and from the center, in which we see this very interesting framing of the femme couteau as an upright figure, which she describes as a wrapped folded marble blade with a delicate pudenda exposed. If you have it lying down in like a kind of Chinese medical doll, as you see here, it's almost as if she's on her front and it's exposing, in fact, her buttocks. We know from Daniel Belasco that the image on her cover was from the 1947 exhibition of Louise Bourgeois at the Lawlist things, for whom the main activist was Eleanor Lust, another woman playing an important role. But when Louise Bourgeois is presented at MoMA in 1982, it's very much as an abstract sculptor. 1985, I met the work in person for myself. I had a sort of, not a tactile, but a visual encounter at the Serpentine Gallery, curated by the remarkable Stuart Morgan, who was also responsible for the Rites of Passage exhibition a few years later at the Tate, which, as it were, situated Louise Bourgeois in relation to contemporary artists such as Mona Khatoum, whose Corps Étranger appeared there, but under the rubric of Julia Kristeva's framing of art at the end of the 20th century under the phenomenon of abjection, the body falling, the body exposed, the body revealed. and if engaging with these particular works, I was both absolutely stunned by them in terms of a certain kind of unplaceable eroticism, but also I remember the sort of being sort of racked, not racked in sense, delighted with sort of peals of delighted laughter that broke forth at the sheer kind of daring of them. And I imagined Louise Bourgeois, the artist, as tall, like a cross between a kind of Hannah Wilkie and a Rita Hayworth. And I was obviously somewhat mistaken in that, but the voice was clearly that. But what I want to suggest in seeing these works was I immediately had the feeling, as I did again when I saw them in the Tate exhibition curated by Frances Morris, I think in 2012, that I was looking at certain kinds of works that could only have been made by somebody who had been the mother of sons, because there is a quite specific relationship to what you might call the spiral, or in a sense, the phallic form. It is the encounter with the little boy's penis, often circumcised as they were in the 20th century in America, as well as in some parts of Europe, irrespective of religious association. But there's something about the fact that women who are mothers of sons hold in their hands day after day, week after week, repeatedly, month after month, year after year, in some sense, a male child's future sexuality and potential paternity. It's not quite the same. You can't damage a little girl with the same way you can do serious damage to a little boy. And it's something that I think is an unsaid recognition, which is something I wish to bring to the circuit service, and something which allows a certain kind of delighted humor, a certain kind of tactility, a certain fascination with the shape, which is not part of the history of Western art through classical sculpture. So when I come to the images that you chose for this exhibition, I'm deeply struck and by this juxtaposition, ask myself, in what terms can these two women be aligned? What is it that we will do when we try to align them or suggest that there is an alignment because they met, they knew each other, but are they on the same trajectory? I cannot fully understand how we can align a French Catholic woman born in France, growing up and trained in France, and then working through the 1940s and 50s in a New York environment of immigrant and native born abstract sculptors and post-surrealism, and a Jewish and Polish, because the two things are not necessarily bonded, woman born into a professional, educated middle class, whose entire adolescence from the age of 13 from 1939 to 1945 was spent being plunged catastrophically into one of the greatest horrors of the 20th century, which was a profound assault on the body and the mind, and whose effects we cannot determine, except insofar, not as memories, because they were kept in a vault of silence, as they pressed and surfaced unexpectedly, impressing themselves upon the forms of her sculpture. And it is as a sculptor that memory emerges, in a sense, in a plastic form, not in a sense from the biographical element of this. And I am very wary of the ways in which women are being re-entered, re-included in the so-called canon, the blue chip canon now, by means of melodrama, sensation, and a kind of biographical sensationalism, which recasts women or accepts women insofar as they are vulnerable, victims, or angry or mad, in a recreation of a concept of hysterical femininity, which undermines our understanding of indeed why in the 20th century, in the second half of the 20th century, there is a post-traumatic engagement with a non-classical body. So when you come to that photograph, we have to think about the question as to why the staging of art in the act, why staging the act? Why are we looking at women doing this? Why did somebody ask them to pose? How did they dress in order to pose? And what is the studio shot? And what relationship does it have to the changing nature of art, in which we came to understand that the very process which involved the body itself in gestures and actions come to be, in a sense, inseparable from the nature of our aesthetic and sensory and intellectual experience of what this art is. doing. And how do codes of gender determine the significance of these images as we look for them? At what stage was this photograph taken? Why are these photographs so obviously posed? What are they doing? What are they meant to show us? And I asked myself, how do you dress to carve marble? Not like this. How do you dress to be photographed, apparently carving marble, by working on an almost finished piece? These are staged photographs. The working with marble has itself a direct history from, it's not done, in one sense, from the Camille Claudel moment of making plaster casts and pointing machines and then carving, the moment of direct carving at the beginning of the 20th century and the return to this activity of which Barbara Hepworth is an important. But today, if you carve marble, you have health and safety regulations that require you to protect yourself from the danger of marble dust. So this photograph is not an action photograph. It is part of the case of Alina Szapocznikow, of a photojournalist piece for Elle magazine, in which we have Alina, called Alina, infantilizing her once again, sculpts her bellies in Michelangelo's marble. A little phrase which I could unpick and spend some time deconstructing, but won't do for you. But here we have a clear statement of what the complex process that Louise Bourgeois and Alina Szapocznikow were involved in this particular time, in terms of their dependence upon the quarrymen, on the tailleurs, the cutters, in all the big heavy work of creating this, and then and obviously power tools. And what we're seeing is finished work. We're not witnessing the process of the emergence of form from sculpture. You see here with the kind of little posing, and it's based on a body cast of her friend, a particular engagement with the body, which has been quite radically translated into the possibility of kind of not Michelangelo so much as Bernini kind of sculptural evocation of the body's flesh. And I should put up here the touch of Apollo's hand on Daphne's body in the famous Bernini Pursuit of Daphne. Here we see her sort of dressed to work and maybe doing some final polishing up or cutting away at the edges. But of course, crucially, we have the tailleur always in the background. I've created a little sequence in the what I call the Virtual Feminist Museum, because we're dealing here with gender in a very profound way, because we're dealing with bellies, and the masculine equivalent is the torso. So we evoke Michelangelo. Michelangelo, was encountered the Belvedere torso. Michelangelo took it off into the figure in the Michelangelo's Just Judgment, where you also have the sort of, in a sense, the skin, St. Bartholomew, the melting flesh that echoes again with the Alina Szapocznikow. And here the male body is also always about this musculature, this that young men try so hard in the gym to define, this sense of the abs, of the particular thinning of the skin in order to produce a maximum sense of it. The counterforce, of course, is one of the oldest figurines we have in the world, the Willendorf figurine held in Vienna, excavated only in 1908, so entering the modern imaginary only at the period of modern sculpture. And here we have one marked very much by the specific signs of vulva, a navel, breasts. These are the key figures in the configuration, no feet here. Now, the sculpture, the bellies, is made in two forms, one for the museum there, and here it's in blue-veined marble, which is a completely different experience from one that we see in the Kohler-Müller in the white. Now, what is it that we're looking at? We're looking at a kind of gamble, of taking these two forms which are doubled. So it's not two breasts, it's not two balls, it's, as it were, two bellies, but they're set on top of each other. And in a sense, the enjeu, the gamble here, is the equilibrium of the two elements mounted on each other. And as we see them from the side here in an exhibition from 1969, we see the potential in simply its forms to create a kind of in one sense, what Bonacina calls a human landscape of hills and valleys, but particularly in a sense, the articulation of the two as we see them fullness and twist. Now, in that virtual museum, we'll go through, we have this, again, as I've just seen it, but also we have this particular, the Kore, the young girl, who has not got a bulging belly and got small and not as it were, once milk-filled breasts, right the way through to Van Gogh's study of one. But when we have the other one, we have the draped Venus, in which we do have the breasts, but we cover the pudenda. And in the conversation, I wanted to put in the body that Paula Modersohn-Becker in her own self-portrait, also the self-portrait as a swelling belly, in sense so that the pregnancy is a swelling belly, and apart from that, as women, we are to keep flat as possible and not, as it were, to have rolls of flesh. The crouching Venus is one that does indeed indicate that if you bend, your flesh does, in a sense, crease. And I set that in conversation with Jenny Savile's exploration of the imaginary body of a woman who is not tiny and thin and flat is seen to be grotesque, and flesh is an excess that marks any woman who is not, as it were, stick thin. And here she has it in a piece called Branded. I'm going wrong direction. And how then do we think about this in relation to Alina Szapocznikows' self-portrait, 1966, with the protuberant breast carved out of marble, but made in sort of strangely eyeless because of the surmounting of the discs and the in placement of only a cast of the lips, the mouth being something very, very troubling for me throughout Alina Szapocznikows' work in ways that would lead to a little lecture about Lilia Cavani's film, whose name that's gone out of my head now, etc. It'll come to me in a moment, that was so controversial, which is also, in a sense, a film about the concentrationary universe. And what of her then self-portrait herbarium of 1971, where all form has been lost, everything has flattened out in this kind of almost like melting wax of the sort of the emptied out and the abjecting fall of the body that ultimately loses all form and shape. And I finally want to put it in conversation with, and seeing the side view of the self-portrait of 1960, with Torso of 1966, a cast of the body which itself is then mounted on stone, and as a headless torso and a sexless torso, armless as well, but with the title, an inscription, "Thanks for the armor, Alina," as if it's become like a military breastplate. What we make then of the headless torso of 1968 as she moves into resin and polyester, in which now it is, as it were, a kind of creation of another specific woman's breasts, but now lost, headless and handless in a sea of dark polyester. And finally, what of bringing in a torso by Louise Bourgeois, self-portrait it's called, torso, self-portrait, 1963 to 64, before the trips to France, before the encounter with Alina Szapocznikow. What am I looking at? Is it flayed? Is it opened? Is it an exoskeleton? Is it structured? Is it matching, corresponding sides? Is it erupting out of the skin? Is it asexual, or is it inverted? And really actually a hidden feminine figure of the breasts, with the ribs, as it were, now behaving like the kind of armature that exposes resist the kind of the defined ab muscles, musculature of the masculine, and points down like the femme couteau to the point of the female body's entry in between her legs. And what of these works from 1975, long after the visit and the encounter and the death of Alina Szapocznikow, where in Avenza there is latex sculpture, whereas in the pieces, the costumes that she created for the banquet, the confrontation at the gallery in New York, with this kind of multiply breasted, this Artemis version of the female torso, as not abdomen and belly, but breasts, a different kind of figuration. And here I want to end with the multiple portrait of 1965, where she, like in anticipation of the Grand Ventre, she poses a repeating cast of a body part again, but this mouth, this particular area that insists over and over again, this sightless and in a sense voiceless mouth, mounted precariously in different ways on a granite form. So when we come back to this whole rapid 30-minute review of something just posed by the two elements of this conference that I'm so honored to open, I have a final question. Where is the pleasure? Why do we talk so much about the heavy weight of memory and the trauma on them, which indeed I have contributed to in different ways? But where is the pleasure in the classic moment of sculpture? What did these two women find when they went to Italy and had access to this, this support to actually work in this extraordinary material of marble, to bring form forth from, to cut out, to cut and to carve and then to polish and then to model and to refine a kind of the two different axes of the sexual body as an imaginary form of touch, because you can't imagine either the two pieces of sleep or the bellies without wanting to make these gestures of the hand, in a sense the curves of the female body, but also in a sense that the roundness of the little male body that Louise Bourgeois so repeatedly finds. So I do not have an answer for you, and I'm looking forward to all the papers that you will write and ultimately will be published as people explore this relationship. I want to start with this kind of anxiety that we have forgotten how we got here, who got us here, what is the kind of feminist questions that got us here, how do we avoid, in a sense, being part of something which is collaborating with an excision of that feminist questioning and the language of our analysis in favor of a kind of a sophisticated formulation of comparing two women as if any two women are the same simply because they're women. This is the great challenge for feminism, to re-include women and to singularize each woman as expanding the complexity of humanity, each in her own generational, geopolitical, psychological, and historical specificity. Thank you.